I didn't. Jomo. Sorry, please unmute yourself. I can see that you are muted.
Sorry, am I in the wrong place?
Yeah, you are here. You are in the right place. No worries. Don't worry.
Hi, Professor.
Hello,
Professor Jomo, how are you?
fine, thank you. I'm
Good
glad
to see you.
you're here.
See you. It's been a year since we met, the last time we met.
Where did we meet?
I'm trying to remember whether it was in Kenya or Kuala Lumpur, but it is one of the places. And that's why the question I asked you is about the name Jomo.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Every Kenyan asks me that question.
Yeah, that time you were a frequent person in Kenya. But I also came to Kuala Lumpur when I became to set up Africa, Alliance for Financial Inclusion.
Yeah. Oh, you were with the
still here.
Science plays a vital role for economic development and societal well-being. Understanding this, the Academy of Sciences Malaysia was established with a mission to be Malaysia's thought leader in all areas of science, technology, and innovation. To realize its mission, ASM harnesses the nation's top scientific minds to chart the STI direction and facilitates the implementation of an innovation-led economy for the country. ASM's commitment lies firmly in fostering a culture of excellence in STI in Malaysia. ASM does this by providing independent, credible, relevant, and timely STI input of national and international importance to the country. Our network of expertise comprises Malaysian scientists, engineers, and technologists who specialize in various disciplines. The Academy assists in upgrading the nation's technological capabilities in the industrial sectors by producing high-quality publications such as peer-reviewed journals, monographs, and books. In addition, ASM also provides input on current and future technology trends to be considered and taken up by the government in driving the nation's economy forward. To provide Malaysian scientists with the best opportunities and exposure, ASM actively extends its international networks and collaborations. It currently has a range of multilateral engagements with renowned scientific institutions worldwide. The Academy also champions the need to grow the right talent in STI by cultivating interests in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics to the younger generation. In short, the Academy's ethos is proudly defined as Think Science, Celebrate Technology, Inspire Innovation.
Welcome back. No discussion on science and technology can ignore the aspect of sustainable development. For this reason, we are convening a panel of illustrious speakers to deliberate on sustainable development in the tropics. This panel session will be moderated by Tan Sri Dr. Munir Majid, the chairman of CHARI ASEAN Research and Advocacy. So Tan Sri, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome to this session
where we will discuss sustainable development in the tropics. And we have speakers in different time zones who will be addressing us on this topic. And we have an impressive lined up of speakers who include Nobel Peace Prize laureate, professors of economics, leading lights and public intellectuals who have been involved in establishing and implementing development policies in underbanked and neglected sectors of the economy. You have their eminent names before you, and it is our privilege to hear them at a time when the world faces an existential environmental crisis after many years of the destructiveness of man. Now, plotting sustainable development at this time is a necessity, but not easy, with unequal burden and cost of that development, with political and social pressures that have to be met, and with a world divided on so many levels, including the distribution of that burden and cost. So can we in the tropics, with our diversity of resources, find a way out, work together to meet the multiplicity of interests that have to be balanced? Our first speaker is Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who is chairman of the Jeffrey Sachs Center on Sustainable Development at Sunway University and director at the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. Professor Sachs only has 45 minutes with us, so we will immediately have an open discussion with him after his 15-minute presentation to make full use of his presence. So without further ado, can I invite Professor Jeffrey Sachs to address us on tropical underdevelopment. Professor Sachs, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Greetings to everybody here around the world. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Thank you for having this session, and thank you for inviting me. There are so many things we could talk about and that I would like to speak about, especially the very urgent and current policy issues that you, Chairman, have just put on the table. But I'm going to step back conceptually just to raise some questions and about tropical development itself, because about a quarter century ago, I started trying to understand why the economic geography of the world was really starkly related to latitude. When one looked at the world a quarter century ago, and it remains to an important extent true today, with some exceptions, the level of GDP per capita, a proxy for economic development, has a strong geographical relationship and especially a strong latitude gradient. And simply put, the closer to the equator, in general, the poorer are the regions of the world. The farther away, the more poleward are the places on the planet, the higher typically is the GDP per capita. Of course, there's no such simplistic one variable relationship, but even when adding in many other potential determinants of differences of GDP per capita, it was quite clear that latitude played an enormous role. Other factors geographically that played an important role of course, were distance from sea routes, proximity to the coastline, presence of valuable mineral or non-mineral resources, and so forth. So without question, many factors are at play, but simply location on the planet relative to the equator is a strong correlate of this particular measure of development, the GDP per capita. So it was a quarter century ago that I began to think about this puzzling fact, because there's no special reason why that should be the case at all. And of course, distance from the equator could mean all sorts of things. It could have something to do with history. It could have something to do with physical geography. It could have something to do with climate. It could be completely coincidental. And so when such a strong correlation shows itself, that requires analysis. I wrote a paper 21 years ago called Tropical Underdevelopment, where I tried to understand some of the potential causal links that are evident in this simple geographic correlation. And I placed a lot of emphasis on climate as perhaps the important intermediate factor. It's clear that a tropical climate not only is classified differently from other climate zones of the world. In the climate classification that I have long preferred, the Köppen-Geiger classification, the tropical areas are the A zones in this letter system. The C and D zones are the temperate regions. The B zones of the world are the dryland and desert regions. And the A zones are distinctive for climate, but because of the climate distinctions, they are distinctive in other ways as well. And I studied two of these ways of tropical distinctiveness. One is the distinctiveness of tropical disease. There are many kinds of evidence suggesting that the infectious disease burden tends to be higher in tropical areas because of the presence of a number of important diseases that are temperature regulated. Historically, and in burden of disease, malaria may be the most important of these, but many other diseases, such as dengue fever or many helminthic infections, schistosomiasis, trypanosomiasis, and so forth, are tropically located because they are temperature sensitive. Malaria, for example, falciparum malaria does not transmit below roughly 14 degrees Celsius. And this means that endemic malaria is really concentrated in the tropical zones. The other kind of tropical condition that could be distinctive is agriculture. And while the tropics gives us some of our most wondrous food and beverage products in the world, to be sure, there are reasons why tropical agriculture faces specific conditions and challenges. It's long been argued for a number of reasons that staple production in large parts of the equatorial region are made difficult by soil fragility, by loss of soil nutrients, by the rainfall, the easy depletion of crucial nutrients that need replenishment, and by the difficulty of mixed animal grain farm systems. Again, these are broad generalizations and correlations that certainly have multiple counterexamples. One thinks of the rich monsoon, high productivity rice cultivation in parts of Asia, the remarkable soil fertility in Java, and so forth. So every sentence that I'm saying, one can think of 10 counterexamples, but there probably are distinctive features of agriculture that could potentially help to account for the long history of relative tropical underdevelopment. Two other measures probably also should be added right at the start, and that is that development has important increasing returns to scale, so that when regions are interconnected in a trading area and through migration of people and technologies, there's an advantage. And definitely the largest contiguous climate area of the world is the Eurasian mid-latitudes. So the parts of Eurasia between roughly 15 degrees north latitude and 45 degrees north latitude. And this is a large band that stretches from Europe to East Asia that encompasses a very large proportion of the world's population, in fact, but it's a contiguous belt of wheat growing, of mixed agriculture, and throughout history of a tremendous amount of trade and sharing of technology, stretching from China to the Roman Empire already 2,000 years ago. Whereas the tropical areas at the equator do not have this kind of contiguity because of just the physical placement of the continents and the fact that there isn't such a large connected, contiguous band at the equator. So historians, not just myself, but historians came to designate that long, contiguous band of subtropical and temperate region in Eurasia as the so-called lucky latitudes. The area that throughout history has tended to be the home to the most powerful and leading economies of the day, already stretching back more than 2,000 years. Suffice it to say that, and sorry, one more feature that is perhaps is just coincidental to all of this. When the fossil fuel era began at the end of the 18th century with the invention of the steam engine, it happened for deep geological reasons, not for any obvious reason, that once again, the tropical areas of the world were relatively bereft of coal compared to the mid latitudes and the temperate zones that had most of the world coal deposits, so that at least for the first 150 years of the Industrial Revolution, the mid-latitudes had a big advantage in fossil fuel energy compared to the tropical zones. So, writing in 2000, I noted this strong geographic gradient. I argued that tropical disease, difficulties of tropical agriculture, relative lack of contiguity of the world's tropical lands and smaller proportion of the world's population in the tropical lands, and perhaps simply the accident of the bad luck of coal being a higher latitude mineral by the time that the steam engine was found. Of course, coal started in the tropics, but the continents moved over 100 million years. By the time the 19th century came around, the tropics faced multiple disadvantages. Then a major geopolitical disadvantage, of course, became the reality of the tropical regions for well over 2 centuries, and that is the European imperial conquest of the tropics, which undoubtedly was a further disaster demographically, culturally, in human terms, militarily, and in development terms as well, because I think there is a general principle that it's extraordinarily difficult and rare to achieve economic development when under colonial domination. And so this added factor, which is a crucial one, no doubt was a major amplifier of tendencies that had been evident even before the European imperial period. Well, that brought my thinking up to the year 2000. Last year, I published a book called The Ages of Globalization, which has a subtitle about the importance of geography, technology, and institutions in economic development. I think it is right to think about the history of development and the prospects of development as being the interplay of 3 factors: geography, technology, and institutions. Certainly not a single factor, even a factor as rich as geography, which itself is multidimensional. We should think about development in complex systems terms, but acknowledge that geography, meaning climate, resource availability, energy reserves, mineral deposits, proximity to sea lanes, topography, vegetative cover, biodiversity, all of those factors as part of the forcings that determine differential development in the world. Now, let me turn to the present and the future. It remains true till today that the tropical regions, by and large, are poorer than the mid-latitude and high-latitude regions. There are exceptions, of course. Singapore is one of the richest countries in the world, a tropical destination. What accounts for Singapore's remarkable development? Well, it's a combination of many factors, starting with the, I think, brilliant governance and strategy, but combined with the fact of sitting on the major trade route between Europe and Asia and becoming an economy, an entrepot that was developed on the basis of that trade facilitation, but then with the many other brilliant additions to strategy since Singapore's independence in the 1960s. But there are a few other exceptions like that. So the patterns remain true today. And then one can ask, is the tropical location therefore continuing to be a heavy burden on the future of development? The answer is complex because in many ways, the burdens of tropical development in the past are now, if not readily overcome, at least well overcome by advances in technology. So what was once a mass and inevitable killer, endemic malaria, is now a completely controllable disease. And a new vaccine, of course, was introduced just a couple of weeks ago, only partially effective, but it's pointing the way to perhaps the elimination of malaria burden in the coming generation with improved technology. moving to the digital age, moving to renewable energy resources, means that we're in another massive global shift in terms of relative advantage of different regions. The desert regions are now the best places on the planet to produce renewable energy, whereas before, a desert seemed to be a crippling condition for development, and especially if there wasn't oil and gas under the desert, the situation was rather bleak. But with the advent of low-cost photovoltaic power, desert regions will now have the chance to become energy superpowers, in fact, in future years. Digital, renewable energy, advances of agricultural technology, advances of health technology should be sufficient to offset or overcome many of the burdens of tropical underdevelopment in the past. The geopolitical situation, of course, is vastly better than it was 50 or 100 years ago, with independent sovereign nations and with a strengthening of regional cooperation in the African Union, in ASEAN, and in other places. There is a hypothesis, however, that climate change could hit the tropics harder than other regions, even if the absolute temperature increase in the tropics is less. This would be a tragedy on top of a long history of disadvantage. But there are hypotheses that because of pre-existing high temperatures, the further increment of temperatures in the tropics is especially detrimental to food production and to human activity, which faces increasing human burdens of living in places that are now reaching 45 or 50 degrees Celsius as heat waves intensify as the result of global climate change. So I have to put a question mark at the end of whether the continuing warming of the planet will add an extra burden to what is already the hottest part of the planet and the region that faces thermal stress in crops, in disease, and in human activity as a potential continuing burden on tropical underdevelopment. Let me leave it at this point, only to emphasize that the issue of tropical underdevelopment is not a new phenomenon. It's not a phenomenon of the colonial and imperial period. It is a phenomenon that in many ways has been part of human history for at least 2 millennia. The burdens of the environment change depending on conditions of technology, institutions, geopolitics, and other factors. I believe, as a general matter, that every part of the world has the possibility to achieve sustainable development, given the wondrous technologies that we have potentially available. I believe that achievement of sustainable development everywhere depends on enhanced global cooperation. And I would add finally that solid development in any part of the world must be well contextualized to the local environment, culture, climate, and conditions. So there will necessarily be a pattern of tropical development with distinctive features. Thank you very much for letting me open the discussion and just reflect on a quarter century of my thinking on these issues.
Thank you very much, Professor Sachs. I think we have about 10 to 15 minutes for discussion based on your presentation or your submission just now, and I would invite our speakers this evening to also come in. Nevertheless, may I start, Professor?
Please.
Is the tropics, therefore, condemned, to this unlucky situation? It doesn't have that luck of the lucky latitudes. How long is it going to be condemned to this? You mentioned technology. The question arises is access to that technology. Okay. You talked about ability to have sustainable development. The question is the transition to sustainable development, the transition cost. Then the issue arises about access to finance. So access to technology, access to finance, and the fact that they are the unlucky part of the world where you have the climate causing damage. I am from Southeast Asia, as you know, and there are certain disturbing hypotheses, you call them, but what I have been noting is been repeated again and again that 80% of Southeast Asia population live 6.5 miles or less from coastal waters, and accelerated sea level rise is going to be a threat for this population. So it has also been worked out that this region's sea level will increase by 27 inches before the end of the 21st century. So you got everything against it, so to speak, everything against it. So is it condemned? Are we condemned to that? Okay, on the one side. And on the other side of it is, what do we do, to wriggle ourselves free of this condemnation? Professor Sachs.
There's no question that finance lies at the essence of overcoming whatever hazards and difficulties and losses from history need to be recovered. So there is no geographic determinism and there is no historical determinism, but finding oneself endangered or relatively impoverished is definitely a hindrance in this world. And especially a hindrance in which first movers, early conquerors have advantages of power, access to technology, wealth that has been accumulated in the past, and that throws up barriers to catching up. So almost every day, in my role in the United Nations, I emphasize the need for a massive overhaul of international financing to ensure that developing countries, and especially low and middle income countries, have a vastly increased access to finance and to technology in order to close existing gaps on infrastructure and on technological capacity. The one thing that can't be closed automatically by finance and by infrastructure is knowledge base at home. And the point is that every country, absolutely as its highest priority, without question, anywhere, should be educating its children to the maximum extent possible, and using now online education tools and all the information available online to improve the quality of education. Because in the end of the day, whatever else is done in terms of finance and infrastructure and technological transfer, it will be the knowledge of especially young people that will be the determining factor in future development.
Thank you.
So
I think there is a point made about education. Of course, time is of the essence against against the ravages of climate change that we are facing. I mean, our next speaker will be addressing actually redesigning the system of inequality, which would address some of the issues you were about to address. But I think one more question that has arisen from your presentation just now, Professor Sachs. One of the viewers has said, you talked about governance, actually. That was an interesting point, again. So one of the viewers has said the images, data, tell us about the degradation of nature in Southeast Asia, Borneo, Java, also the Amazon, mostly for agricultural purposes and food production. How can we stop this? Okay, this is an interesting balancing problem. How can we stop this or reverse this if the leaderships are initiating it? This is a problem of governance and a problem of need as well, for agriculture, from agriculture.
Yeah, these are hard.
We lost. Can you hear us? Can you hear us, Professor? I think he can't hear us either. We've lost the professor.
Think about the transformations that are needed. Maybe this won't be short enough, but I think about 6 major transformations that every society needs to achieve sustainable development. The first is education. I won't belabor the point. The second is healthcare. I won't belabor the point. The third is the energy transformation to green renewable energy. The fourth is the land use transformation to sustainable land use. And this will not work if Southeast Asia chops down its magnificent rainforests to plant palm oil every place. This is a big risk, or to chop down the ancient tropical hardwoods for furniture in China. This will not work. So there has to be limits on the land use and the ocean use, by the way, because the waters around Southeast Asia are being depleted of marine life by overfishing, often by fleets coming from Spain or from other areas that are absolutely illegal. But this is also happening on a large scale. The fifth transformation is urban infrastructure, because strange to say, but urbanization is actually the best protection of the rural areas. And it is also the place where critical services are most properly delivered. And I think that for very deep reasons, rapid urbanization will continue through Southeast Asia in the coming decades, and the cities need to be livable, decent, with the infrastructure for transport, for digital access, for public services. And the sixth area that I just want to mention is the digital transformation itself. We need universal access to digital services because they're so powerful, to education, to healthcare, to payment systems, to governance systems, to getting licenses and other means online. That does require 5G. That does require regional cooperation. So education, healthcare, energy, land use, urban infrastructure, and digital are, for me, the core transformations.
Thank you.
All of them require financing.
Thank you.
All of them require plans. All of them require global, regional cooperation. All of them require that we avoid global conflicts or cold wars. So it's a tough agenda ahead, but it's a feasible agenda.
Thank you,
It just
Professor.
requires
Sorry to have to cut
very
in.
good governance.
Yeah, I think there's so much to be done. There's so much to be done, to reverse the situation. And I had to cut in because our next speaker, has to leave by 9 p.m. Our Malaysian time. I don't know what time it is over where you are, Professor Sachs. Of course, our next speaker, of course, is Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Professor Muhammad Yunus, who's speaking from Bangladesh. As I said, he has to leave at 9 p.m., so we will have an open discussion with him immediately after he speaks in the next 15 minutes on redesigning the system of inequality. In fact, part of what you were saying should be done to the redesign. Great to see you, Professor Muhammad Yunus. Thank you. Can you take the floor then, please, Professor Muhammad Yunus? I think you are muted. You are muted. Okay.
Okay, now
right.
It's muted from this control. Sorry
Okay.
for that.
Fire away,
Thank
fire
you.
away.
Thank you, thank you. Delighted to be with you, and thank you for having me. And I was very happy to see Jeffrey Sachs. Yeah, I'm a great admirer of him, listening to him in the last few minutes. The point you raised with me is about the inequality. So I would just go straight on to that. And I would say inequality is not something accidentally happened. It happened by design. It's something fundamental within economics. The way the machine, the economic system, this structure has been built, the outcome is the inequality. I don't even want to call it inequality, because inequality is something which is a kind of a difference between a cow and a goat or something like that, similar but different, and inequality on the size and all that. But what we are talking about is a completely of different nature. It's like comparing a fly with an elephant. You don't call it inequality. It's a gross difference that exists between two. So I would say it's a huge difference between the two entities, one at the top and one at the bottom. And why do I say it's by design? Because the economics, the way it has been designed, it became a wealth concentration machine. It's a concentration, not just inequality. It came out as a wealth concentration machine, and it came right from the very start point. The starting point of economics is a human being that plays into economics are defined as someone who is driven by self-interest. That is the basic definition of an actor of economic system. Someone who's driven by self-interest. So you have someone at the core on which everything has been built. So you have designed a selfish human being and build a system to serve that selfish human being. So as a result, we built a system of business where profit maximization is an expression of self-interest. So we cannot see anything else. We have a human being which is driven by self-interest, and profit maximization is the expression of that. So we built everything on the basis of profit maximization. And profit maximization proceeds in a kind of a ruthless way. There's no other compromise in it. In the process, you leave people, some people behind, and you continue to move forward The ones who were lucky ones get luckier and continue to move up. Even if you look at the present situation of wealth, in a way you can describe it in an extreme form by saying 99% of the wealth is owned by 1% of the population of the world. So this is not about inequality. It's exclusive ownership of the wealth by selected few. Very small portion of human being controls the totality of the wealth. And if you imagine, or if you look at the income map or a wealth map, bulk of the population, 99% of the population or close to that population, are at the bottom of this scale. The lucky 1% is not anywhere near them. They are way up in the sky of the income map or wealth map, or you can say in the outer space of the wealth map. So there's a big difference between the bulk of the people, 90%, 95%, 99% of the people who are below, and one lucky person who are above. So that is what we're discovering. It's not about inequality. It's about segregation of wealth between people and wealth. And wealth is on the one side of the income scale, wealth scale, and people are on the other side. They are always on the bottom. And the unfortunate thing, which makes it worse, the wealth is continually moving away from people. It's not that they are there and somehow that distance remain stable. It doesn't remain stable. People remain where they are, but the wealth rushes away from people continuously. And that's the system that we built. One example of this is what we have seen during the pandemic. You see it every day, but pandemic made it very visual. You know that millions of people lost their job, lost their income, lost their livelihood, their food, their housing, at the very advent of the pandemic as it came out. And they pushed down where they were still below that. As I said, they are at the bottom part of the income scale. Now they are pushed down further down because of the pandemic. So while bulk of the population are pushed down, the lucky ones on the top in the outer space of the income wealth scale, you see they are having additional trillions of dollars during the same period. So their movement outwards has not stopped. Pandemic didn't stop that, even slow it down. It continued to move up. So this is it. Where does this come from? It comes from the basic definition of human being as a self-interested person. I said, if you want to address this issue of extreme wealth concentration, you have to address this particular issue because that has misrepresented real human beings. Real human beings are not driven by self-interest alone. Real human beings are driven by self-interest as well as collective interest. Economists don't have any room for collective interest. They have only one interest, self-interest. And that's why they have, in their economy, in their theory, they created an artificial human being who is like a money-making robot. He doesn't understand, he has no other feelings. He continues to do that. So the moment you bring in the collective interest, then you add something of human nature into the human being in economics. You see, we call economics the subject where all human beings are actors. But those human actors are not real human beings because humanity is taken away from economics. There is nothing called humanity within economics. So it's a humanity-less being that we are talking about. And that's what we are performing on the stage of the economic world. That's it. And we are performing as a kind of robotic nature. And we are performing very well in the robotic nature, exactly the way it is supposed to be. So even if you look at the distance between real human being and the robotic human being of economics, vaccine is a good example during this pandemic. Vaccine came. Vaccine is a knowledge to protect people from the pandemic, from the COVID-19. And so we are delighted, we are excited, we celebrated that finally we have a protection. Now we can protect all human beings from this COVID-19. But that's not what happened. The COVID, whenever the vaccine is produced, 10 big countries, 10 super rich countries, they took the 80% of the total production of vaccines, because these are produced in those 10 countries and lucky countries. And they got the 80% of this supply. Remaining, rest of the world got only 20% of the vaccine, whatever is left. Why? Because vaccine is a knowledge, but it is a prisoner of profit. So there's a profit wall around the vaccine. While we are saying you take off the wall, wall is made up, there's a patent right, intellectual property right. I said, this is a reason, this is a time we don't want to use this prison, take off that prison, make it patent free, make it commercial ownership free, so that across the world, this can be produced. Wherever that capacity exists, people can have at least access to that vaccine. Absolutely adamant, they will not do that. We continue to make this campaign. We have failed so far. I don't see any success coming up very soon. So this is the situation we have. So we have the knowledge. Knowledge is a prisoner. Let people die, but we want our profit. We will not submit our profit without getting to our profit. So the profit versus life came out very nakedly, and which side is winning, you can see that. So this is the basic part of it. And what makes it happen? Financial system is designed for that purpose. Financial system is designed to support, to encourage and facilitate the richer to get rich to get richer and richer, to get super rich. So we are doing that. The whole machine, the financial system is built for that purpose. And this is a vehicle which creates this entire wealth concentration. So behind the wealth concentration, I would say responsibility is with the starting point, how we define ourselves. And we created a wealth concentration machine, which continues to do that. And all the existing system cannot address that. We have to redesign the system in a different way. And that's what we have been arguing, that instead of self-interest, we have to add collective interest, and you have to create a new business to serve the collective interest. The present business serves the self-interest. New business, which we call a social business. Social business is a non-dividend business to solve human problems. So this is something, a collective interest-driven business, where you don't want to make money, you want to solve problems. So once you add that, then the question of solving problems comes into the picture. And you have to redesign the entire financial system the way it is right now, only serving the rich. You have to redesign the system as a social business financial system. Parallel to the existing system, you have a social business financial system. You design the financial system in a way it brings finance to everybody, because the core of human being is entrepreneurship. Now that you only design business to profit maximization, you have to design the idea of, you have to define the idea of taking a job. Job is something on which profit is made. So you have millions of people working for somebody so that he can become richer and super rich. I said this is abuse of human being. Human beings are not born to work for somebody. This is working for somebody is a name for new name for a slavery, because that's not what the human beings are made for. Human beings are independent being, creative being. It's a packed with unlimited creative capacity, but job has taken away all this creative capacity because you don't use it, because you are driven by orders and instructions and so on. So you submit all your creativity in the hands of the employer. So we have to go back in our education system to let the young people know that they are born as an entrepreneur. So their destiny is to become entrepreneur. In order to become entrepreneur, you need a different kind of financing system, so that every young person knows as soon as he has an idea or she has an idea, the finance would be available so that he or she can become entrepreneur herself. That's where the microcredit came in. Microcredit created millions of women turn into entrepreneur. They didn't go for jobs. Since the finance came, finance is the oxygen of entrepreneurship. That oxygen is missing for vast majority of the population on this planet, because financial system is busy financing to make people super rich. So that's where the essence of entire wealth concentration is all about. I will not use the word inequality for that purpose. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I mean, I think it's interestingly, Professor Yunus, I mean, your address just now talks about the system of inequality, and not inequality per se, but a system that supports and generates inequality and more inequality and more inequality. So you want to bust it, right? You want to bust it. Now, of course, that means, so a replacement or a parallel system, to the one that exists, which causes so much increased inequality. So is there got to be a parallel system? Because right now people talk about digitalization a lot as a democratizing process where people can have access to finance much more easily than before. Whether it's crowdfunding or whatever, or payment systems. But do you have faith that digitalization will be helpful in your desire, to democratize financing, to make people have access who have never had access to financing before? What are your views, Professor?
Answer is no. You see, digitalization is technology. Technology can only make things easier for the user of the technology. It doesn't do anything. Technology doesn't have a mind of its own. The mind is the human mind behind the technology. So if you want to make profit, if you want to maximize profit, you will not go to the poor people, because that's not where your maximization of profit lies. Your maximization lies at the super rich people. So you will use your digitalization to serve the poor in a more efficient way so that you can make more money. So the culprit is not about the digitalization or absence of it. Culprit is what is going on in your mind. If you are, as long as you are a money-making robot, if that's your addiction, you cannot see things in a human way. You see where the money is. You smell money, you feel money, you just go into the money direction. If digitalization can help you go to the poor and doesn't bring you money, hell with the digitalization. I need money. So they will just change around and go to them. They will not go to the poor people. And they will go to the poor people if they see they can make lots of money out of the poor people. So in the process, they will become loan shark. How to squeeze money from the poor people. That's not the kind of finance we are talking about. We are not talking about loan sharking financing. So maybe digitalization will encourage more loan sharking. That's what we should be aware of. That will make poor further poor. So we need social business financing, where you're not there to make money. Even if you don't have the technology, still you are serving the people. And technology make it more worthwhile to reach out more people, so that you can do that. Your intention is not to making money. Your intention to help them, to turn them into entrepreneurs, so that they become successful, they continue, and you are not doing it with your collateral and all kinds of things that normal conventional banking requires. So this is something you could do differently. So the technology doesn't solve a problem. It's the human mind which applies the technology solves the problem.
So, Professor, I mean, how do you change a human mind, right? You have actually been at the forefront of, when you, as founder of the Grameen Bank,
Sure.
in terms of microcredit, you've been at the forefront of this movement to provide access to finance for those who are underbanked, unbanked, and neglected. Fine,
Yeah.
that's very good. At the same time now, whilst you're trying to address that, there's also this problem about sustainable development, the financial needs for sustainable development. Now, how's that also going to be met? So you have like kind of three needs, as it were. You have, of course, this rapacious financial system. Probably, as you say, it's a rapacious financial system, which is so unjust, so unfair, and so on. And then there's these attempts, social business, to do microcredit, microfinancing. At the same time, thirdly, there is need for sustainable development. Where is that money going to come from?
money is not the problem. Money is there. That shouldn't be the issue. Issue is who gets the money, whatever money is available. Again, you have to define what the development means to you. To me, development means something else. Development means people have an opportunity to change themselves. That's the development for me. So the people who are at the bottom, if they are the 20% of the 20% bottom people, have the 20% share of the wealth itself. That's the development for me. So development is not something that all the wealth goes to the rich, and then we are having a huge growth rate, and all the growth benefit of the growth is on the top of the in wealth scale. That's not what the growth is. Whatever growth we are talking about is all concentrates on the top people. People at the bottom remains where they are, and pandemic-like thing pushes them further down. That's not the development it's all about. Development is to make sure that you have share in the wealth that you generate. That's the development for me. If it doesn't contribute to that, that's just a fake name for doing something for the rich. So I'll not go for that one. And also, I would say it's a quality-wise, it has to be broader than that. It's a sustainability issue. Sustainability to me, in terms of three things, it has to come the global warming. Is end global warming is the issue. So that how to stop that global warming, and how to stop the wealth concentration, so the wealth doesn't run away from people. We have to reverse the system so that the wealth comes to the people. Wealth and people live together, not in a segregated. They don't get segregated more and further. The wealth comes towards the people rather than run away from the people. That's a sustainability for me. And sustainability for me is everybody becomes an entrepreneur, and artificial intelligence and all other technologies don't push people out of the whatever livelihood they have, whatever thing they are going to do. They are not become marginalized in a way. Ultimately, human beings become garbage on this planet. They have no role to play. So first one thing, we are in a suicidal path of global warming. We don't have much time left on this planet. So that's not sustainable to begin with. It's a contribution of all the businesses and everything that we designed. They have created this mess to make this so make this global warming becoming our suicidal path. So we have to turn around from the suicidal path, because if you continue with the old path, old roads will always take us to the old destination. And old destination will make us extinct, will make us human beings endangered species on this planet, which already has done that. So we have to make ourselves keep ourselves away from being endangered, rather than a species which will be a happy species, making this life in the planet happier for the next generation and next generation, rather than doing the worst. So that's the direction I would say for me would be development and sustainability, all that signifies.
I have a question here, Professor Yunus, and I would add to it. The question is, in your opinion, is there an ideal for sustainable finance? Is there an ideal for sustainable finance? If yes, what would it be? I would add to that, what is the role of public policy, in terms of sustainable finance? For example, China said that it will no longer finance coal-powered plants in its own country or abroad. Then there was a shortage of power resources recently in the current market. It started financing again and reviving coal-powered plants. So here you are, you have policy which is so noble and so intended to address the sustainability issue, and then when you get under pressure, you succumb and immediately sort of overturn that policy. So the role of public policy, how important is it in your mind?
So you got into politics now. See, what is good is not always the good politics. Politics can be pushing you in the wrong direction. Look at what President Biden is struggling to get his $3 trillion budget approved. Not the budget, but the plan approved. And now poor guy has to come to 1.5, 1.75, and so on and so forth, because politics doesn't allow them to have it. Just because it doesn't allow them to have it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. That's what it's had to be done. If Chinese politics require them to put back the coal-fired plants and back again, that's the wrong thing for the whole world. We should not say that, oh, China is doing the right thing. China is doing the wrong thing. So is the United States, giving subsidies to the fossil fuel and financing fossil fuel to its teeth, even when we are addressing we'll talk about the global warming. At the same time, your finance is pouring in money to continue expansion of the fossil fuel. So that's not the right thing to do. So as long as you are profit maximizer, this is all profit maximizing thing that we are talking about. As long as you remain profit maximizer, you will kill yourself to maximize the profit.
Thank you, Professor. How much more time have you got that you can spend with us? Do you have any more time?
Maybe 5 minutes.
Maybe 5 minutes. Okay, maybe 5 minutes. That's good, because we have a problem here, and I have lots of questions here, but they are a bit more. They're a bit general. You mentioned, of course, the COVID vaccine.
Right.
Apartheid. Actually, some people use the word apartheid
yes, sure.
to describe that situation, whereby vaccines were not coming.
We talk about vaccine flood and vaccine drought.
Yeah. However,
countries are flooded.
Despite
even
despite
they're throwing
everything,
away unused vaccines because they are not usable anymore, while other countries don't have one dose. Yeah,
I mean, what can countries, poor countries, do about this? There was COVAX and all that, fund, and nothing really much has happened. The contribution to that fund was promised, but has not been fulfilled. What can happen?
Well, if you don't have vaccine, you die. There's no other option to it. Somehow you got to have vaccine. There's no other option. Vaccine means protection. At least that gives you, but if you don't have it, you die. So one way, long-term, not short-term solution, one way to create social business pharmaceutical company instead of profit maximizing pharmaceutical company. In future, we should be building our own social business pharmaceutical company so that we produce vaccines not to maximize profit, but to solve people's problem with the zero personal profit out of the company. So that's the direction we have to go. And we have to build all the things in the way so that we can solve the problem. As long as you keep the profit maximization in the picture, we'll be pushed into all the three things that I discussed about the global warming, to kill ourselves. So for profit maximization, we are ready to kill ourselves. That's what we are doing right now. And we are doing in a very calm, calculated way. We give different fancy names to it, but this is what our house is burning, and we are celebrating our success of business and our technology and everything, and we're having party inside the house, but the house itself is burning, and that we don't care, but we are ready to take it. So as long as you have that situation, we have no much argument left.
Well, one final question before we let you go, Professor Yunus. I mean, the thing is, with COVID, we've had this crisis, right? The pandemic, we've had this crisis. And this crisis actually addresses, if you like, sick care, not quite health care. Health care, have we been neglecting health care for so long that when a pandemic occurs, people will be exposed to the disease more easily because their health had not been placed under sufficient care? Do you think this should happen more among us?
I didn't get it. What should happen more?
We should emphasize
more pandemic.
We should emphasize also healthcare. As we try to provide vaccines and so on. But we've not been.
Healthcare was just a kind of a public show. There's nothing inside. It's an empty box. But when it came, we saw that the entire public health system collapsed. It didn't have anything left in that. So we have to come back and redesign the entire healthcare system. Our healthcare system is basically, again, either it's done by government or it is done by profit maximizers. And profit maximizers are not interested in your health, they are interested in your money. So how to make money out of your sickness. They take this as a kind of basis for extracting money from you. And public healthcare, unfortunately, all around the world has been a very sick public healthcare. It's not a very good healthcare system, except for a few countries around the world. But most of the countries, healthcare system is a very, very sick system. It's dysfunctional system most of the time. It doesn't get to the poor people. It doesn't get to the real sick people. Again, doctors don't want to go to the places where they're needed the most. You don't have enough doctors because they don't want to work for the places that they're supposed to work. Those kind of things. So we have to redesign the entire thing. If you want to have the healthcare system built, and one of the things that we are trying to do, since we can't run a public health system, but we run a social business healthcare system. We create our social business health hospitals. We create our social business nursing colleges. We run our social business medical colleges and those kind of things. And we create for the nutrition, we created a joint venture with Danone to produce a special kind of yogurt with all the macronutrients which are missing in the children. There's a lot, nearly 50% of the children in Bangladesh are malnourished. So we put all the macronutrients which are missing in the children into the yogurt and make it very cheap so that poor families can afford it and have it, and the children can have it, and then regain the health. So these are symbolic. These are not a big company that they can take care of all the children in Bangladesh, but symbolic in the way that it's a joint venture with a big company, and it's a possibility that we can expand, and it will encourage other social business to come forward. You don't have to wait for the government decisions to be taken. Individuals can make decisions to solve the problems. That's what the problems of the collective problem solving aspect of human beings come out. That as individuals, we can solve the problems. We don't have to wait for the government and public policy to come whenever they come, whenever that policy suits, whenever their politics suit them. But politics always doesn't suit them. Politics goes in a wrong direction, so we are caught into it.
Thank you so very much, Professor Yunus, for giving us so much of your time and even exceeding the time that you dedicated to us. And all the very best to you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Now we come to a point where will be a bit more normal in the sense that we have our three speakers speaking first, one after the other. Before we have an open discussion with them. So we'll start with our third speaker, Professor Njuguna, Ndung'u, who is from the African Economic Research Consortium. Professor Njuguna will be talking to us about something not unrelated to what Professor Yunus had been talking about, particularly on the digitalization part of it, about financial inclusion supported by digital evolution for inclusive and sustainable development. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I've really enjoyed the debate so far. The discussion is quite rich. And when I was invited, I was asking myself what I can talk about. And I thought that one of the areas that I covered, one of the policy solutions that I actually worked on and have seen it develop since 2007 was actually financial inclusion. And the whole idea was what would support financial inclusion sustainably. And that's why I chose this topic, because I covered it at the policy reader. That is, I was the governor of the Central Bank of Kenya. And also having all this knowledge base. And the question was, how can we support financial inclusion, knowing exactly how the poor were excluded from the financial system? That is why I formed this topic as an example that policies can work to their conclusion if they are followed to the paper. Let me move to the next slide. I actually don't want to lose my job, so I have to actually to tell you that AERC is a capacity building network in sub-Saharan Africa, and we've been there for a long time. This is the 33rd year that we are operating, trying to support policy making in the public sector. And our idea about the knowledge, capacity building and knowledge base is actually summarized in this document, in this, should I say, show. So it is through research and graduate training in economics, and we use policy outreach to reach to the senior policy makers so that they understand what needs to change. Then we go to the next now, start the subject matter of my topic today. I just wanted to talk about digital evolution and how it actually can push a new frontier in terms of finance. But today, we even have had examples in other areas. And one of them was developing the mobile phone-based retail electronic payments platform that was real-time. And this has pushed the digital financial ecosystem and even financial inclusion. I'll be showing examples for that. But the most important thing is that an evolution of financial services have become inclusive, and there is also room to push for financial development. So it's actually a platform that you see, but it can actually be used at the retail level for those who cannot even access the banks. I was looking at the data from GSMA, and they show that there are over 1 billion phone-based accounts in 95 developing countries, and they are transacting over 2 billion shillings, $2 billion every day, and that's quite massive. And beyond the financial services, beyond the financial services, digitization has provided some spectacular results. In Africa, citizens can reach out to government services via e-government. Governments have been able to design and even develop targeted social protection programs, especially now with the COVID pandemic and lockdowns. Revenue authorities, that is tax and revenue authorities, have been able to design innovative electronic tax payments platforms and even design new taxes. And fintechs have been able to design business models with electronic payments platform, and they cut across all the sectors of the economy. And the e-learning platforms that even Jeffrey Sachs mentioned, we have also been using them at the AERC in our graduate program, because students cannot travel across countries, so we are using the e-platform, and e-working is actually working very well. Thank you very much. And let me move to what I really wanted to show after that, the introduction. I just wanted to show that digital evolution has worked, and I wanted to use Kenyan example to actually show 6 outcomes. And the first one is a retail electronic payments platform. The product is called M-Pesa. This is retail electronic payments platform that has evolved. And one of the description is that it is effective, it's efficient, it is transparent, it is safe. But above all, it is inclusive, and also the payments are real-time. And we do believe that retail electronic payments is an easier entry into the financial services for most people, and even informal markets in Africa that are not able to access markets. One of the important aspects of this is actually a retail electronic payments platform. That's why they go to the banks. But the novel of this is that this retail electronic payments platform are operated in commercial banks. But more importantly, they ended up in the subsequent periods, they link the payments platform linked to the bank account. So it means that you don't have to visit the bank. And my point here is that once you have a successful electronic payments platform, which is operational, it becomes a game changer, not only in the financial system, but across all the other sectors of the economy. Let me go to the next result. The second outcome is financial inclusion has been a success, and there is evidence of financial development, inclusive finance, and even poverty reduction. The most important thing is that commercial banks didn't have a platform that can help them manage micro accounts, and this retail electronic payments platform was an answer to their problems. So essentially what we have seen is strong banks with intermediation capacity have emerged, and especially in the East African region. Third, and one of the things that I really celebrate is that in Africa, women can save in instruments that cannot be encroached. They are efficient savers. And we have shown, actually there are studies that have shown that Kenyan households, about 2% of the Kenyan households have been lifted from poverty. And these are mostly female-headed households. And 2% is quite a large number in terms of population. So essentially, the conclusion we make from here is that financial inclusion leads to sustainable poverty reduction. The next slide, please. And the fourth, before I move to that, one of the things, this is just data in Kenya from 2006 to 2019. I joined the central bank in 2007, and I left the central bank in 2015. But what I wanted to show is that financial inclusion before M-Pesa, or even what I'm calling digital platforms, came in, and you can look at it in terms of different ways. One of them is the red, where informal finance was predominant, about 32% of the population. And you can see up to 2019, it has really declined to 6.1%. Those who are excluded stood at 41.3% in 2006, see now that they have dropped to 11%. So essentially, financial inclusion is a success. But of course, at the end of the day is to ask, what do people do when they get into the financial system? That's a debate that we can pick up. Let me go to the next slide. And the next slide, I want to show that one of the fourth outcomes is virtual savings and virtual credit supply platforms have emerged. And this is very important because you don't have to visit the bank. You can actually transact virtually. And even those developments so that they introduced credit scoring mechanism for pricing short-term loans. So it means that it was not only savings, but also credit supply platforms. And since you can use, as long as you can use credit scores coming from your savings and even transaction, then they are used to price the short-term loans. It means that it was going to change, or it is changing the collateral technology that has checked credit markets growth in African economies for many years. This is a major, should I say, revolution. And also, this was also linked to international remittances because it can come directly to your bank account, and so it means you can withdraw through your virtual savings or your virtual savings accounts. Fifth, and this is something that is celebrated, I joined the central bank in a period where monetary policy framework was actually obsolete. And so it means that the impact of monetary policy framework was very, very important. It has allowed us to formulate an effective and forward-looking monetary policy. And in addition, it also allowed us to monitor financial transactions because then you can actually improve your AML CFT regime. This is an issue. The importance of changing monetary policy frameworks has been an important issue in Kenya and even in the East African region. And obviously, because essentially that has helped us to cope with the domestic developments that take place. Let me go to the next slide. And the final outcome I really wanted to share is that fintechs can roll out sustainable business models. And there are so many examples. I've been using so many examples. Those business models, they are sustainable because they cut across the real sectors of the economy and they push agenda for inclusive development. And some of them are even how you supply solar energy, water vending machines in slum areas, even healthcare system cards that actually finance your healthcare. And even you can even invest in government securities using your mobile. So digitization and public finance has also become very important. Tax policy designs, tax payments platforms, and even revenue administration to minimize leakages. And obviously, we have seen that platforms for e-governments are becoming very important. It's easier even to apply for a passport today and even get it online. That is, you apply it online. Of course, at every year you have to go for it physically, but the most important thing is that you move away from that. And I had talked about designing social protection programs, especially during the COVID. They have worked very well. Let me go to the next slide. Having done that, the whole issue is that if these are the developments that have taken place, just because of the simple starting points of mobile phone-based transactions tool, then what can sustain this digital space for inclusive development? And the first point is that if it is the connectivity, if it's the mobile phone that we're going to use, then it means that we have to improve connectivity. Inclusiveness is very important so that no one is left behind. And the infrastructure for fiber optic cables in Kenya was very, very important. And now it is being provided elsewhere, everywhere, even in the rural areas. It was mostly in urban. So this provides us with a chance for scalability of the digitization process and sustainability. And this is going to lower the unit cost and reach out to throughout the economy. There is a lot of debate about the fourth industrial revolution, and it's coming through the digital process. And so it means that we can tag along in terms of this scalability. The second point I wanted to mention in terms of sustaining the digital space is creating an interoperable platform for retail electronic platforms. Of course, when it started, it is the first mover advantage that was actually important. It was very difficult to actually enforce interoperability because that would create disincentive for innovation. But what we really need to do is to support appropriate market developments and lower unit costs. Third, electronic ID system to cope with market innovations and even security. This is something within the East Africa. Kenya stands stands out because of the ID system. But we are now arguing that we need to move to the electronic ID system, which is going to enhance security and even market development. And the final one is state and institutional capacity to cope with the market innovation. M-Pesa, or even this electronic mobile phone-based financial services, succeeded because the regulatory capability was adequate. But again, we need to move further and try to secure the market. We need to improve the capacity for institutions to regulate and protect the market, but also nudge the market in the frontier innovation route, which is going to be very, very important. Finally, having said that, I would like to say thank you very much. That is the last slide. I always like to do the last slide where I want to say from East Africa and from the ARC, it is Asante Sana, or thank you very much. I do believe that this is an example of how digital financial system has changed the whole world, and we do believe it's going to affect all the other markets. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Njuguna. We'll come back to you during discussion time, and it's good to have the African, the Kenyan sort of perspective and experience. Our next speaker is Professor Jomo Kwame Sundaram, Fellow of the Academy of Sciences, Malaysia. And Professor Jomo will be talking about agricultural trade, disease, ecology, and global warming. So, Professor Jomo, take it away.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the organizers for kindly inviting me to join you today. It's difficult to follow on the excellent set of speakers we've heard from, but allow me to take us back 500 years. In 1521, Ferdinand Magellan was actually killed not far from where I sit in the central Philippines. And the reason he was killed was because he was on the circumnavigation of the world, trying to get to tropical products in the Moluccas, in Maluku. It was not for nothing. And basically the Iberians, the Portuguese and the Spanish were fighting for access, control of the spice trade. About over a century later, the Dutch Republic made one of its worst ever deals. It gave up the island of Manhattan in favor of a tropical island, and thus New Amsterdam is now known as New York. This basically reminds us that tropical products, agricultural products, were once very, very highly valued. The late Caribbean economist Arthur Lewis reminded us in a lecture over half a century ago that the prices of tropical products have actually declined very, very significantly compared to temperate agricultural products. Bilge Aten at Columbia University, a Turkish woman economist, has actually updated his data into the 21st century and found this to be the case since then. This is a very important complement to what is often known as the Singer-Prebisch thesis, which basically talks about the declining terms of trade of primary commodities compared to manufactured goods. The point I'm trying to make really is that tropical products were not always as poorly valued as they are today. Peter Bauer, later Lord Bauer with Mrs. Thatcher's ascension, played a very important role in arguing in favor of the smallholders in Malaysia. against the plantation companies. But his concern was to try to keep the price of rubber down. He wasn't especially concerned with the plight of the rubber smallholder. So I think it's very important for us to begin to realize that the problems of food security which we face in the world today are largely due to the fact that northern agriculture in the rich countries continues to be subsidized with subsidies in almost all the rich countries, whereas in the developing countries, basically protectionism is strongly discouraged, even if it is in the interest of protecting farmers as well as food security. This, I think, is very important because there are distortive elements in public policy going on in this world, where certain types of policies are allowed and certain types of policies are disallowed. Let me move on very quickly to a second issue affecting the tropics, and that is the whole question of tropical disease. Jeff Sachs already made mention of this, and so my task is much easier. But if we look at the list of neglected diseases in the world today, we find that the so-called neglected diseases as identified by the World Health Organization and others are largely tropical diseases. It is not because there is a greater proliferation of tropical diseases compared to diseases affecting much of the world, but partly because so much of the world's population is in the tropical belt, precisely because agriculture in this part of the world has been much, much more productive and it has supported far larger populations. So if we think about, for example, the whole question of malaria and other mosquito-borne diseases, for example, these were largely eliminated in Europe due with very good drainage and so on and so forth in the early part of the 20th century. This was one of Mussolini's achievements. I'm not recommending Mussolini to solve these kinds of problems, but the point is that these problems have been solved where there is the political will to do so. In the tropics, we know that basically the plantation managers were generally took residence, plantation managers and colonial officials took residence in elevated circumstances. For example, our Kenyan friend will confirm that Nairobi, Kampala, Harare, and other colonial capitals are all elevated. They're not at sea level, and these were preferred by colonial officials for obvious reasons. The point is that we have been able, where there has been the political will, we have been able to address a range of diseases, and we have neglected tropical diseases, even though they may afflict a huge share of the world's population. From the point of view of pharmaceutical companies do not stand to make much money from generating the necessary medicines or treatments, let alone the tests. This has become very evident, for example, as we all know, with the current situation where over a year ago, the governments of South Africa and India proposed to the WTO to introduce a waiver to suspend intellectual property rights for the duration of the waiver. Thankfully, when the AIDS disease was afflicting much of the world's population, the late Nelson Mandela fought for the public health exception. But if this is not an occasion when a public health exception is sorely needed, I don't know what qualifies. And so we have seen resistance by the rich countries of the world to the request for a waiver. And it has ironically been the US government, the White House, under Joe Biden, who has proposed, who has agreed to the idea of a waiver for the vaccines, but not for the tests, for the treatments, for the equipment, and other things which are very, very badly needed. So as a consequence, we have far, far higher levels of infection for example, sub-Saharan Africa or other poor countries, particularly in the tropical areas, than we have in the rest of the world. Allow me to move on very quickly to a third issue, and that is the whole question of tropical ecology. We all know that biodiversity is far richer in the tropical zone. And this is, of course, extremely important. But we also know that tropical ecological systems are far more fragile. And so the devastation which has been caused by, for example, logging, to bring down a tree and to move that log to a transportation system, whether it is a road or a river, basically involves destroying a great deal of the rest of the ecology concerned. I still remember about 30 years ago that researchers at Columbia University at that time were looking for a particular tree in Sarawak because they had found that the sample from that tree was very promising in terms of providing a cure for AIDS. Unfortunately, the tree had been logged and they couldn't find that tree again. They managed to find another tree, but because the tree was growing in different microecological conditions, that they didn't have the same qualities which allowed it to have the efficacy it did in relation to AIDS. So we can see how ecological systems, we can talk very easily about having areas which are going to be protected and so on and so forth. But as we know very well, logging has been devastative, as the earlier questioner had raised. We also know that plantation agriculture is no substitute, and we also know that mining, for example, has been devastating as far as tropical ecological conditions are concerned. In other words, we are destroying the biodiversity that tropical conditions have allowed and enabled, which are extremely important for a whole range of reasons, which I don't have time to get into right now. But I think it's very important for us to recognize that in the process of mining, developing countries have not been able to benefit. You will know, for example, in East Africa, Tanzania is now the third largest producer of gold in Africa. But Tanzania also actually does not earn any revenue from gold, from the mining of gold, because mining concessions have been given to foreign companies, and the Tanzanian government collects revenue from its people and actually subsidizes by the provision of infrastructure and it enables the taking out of gold ore from the mine areas to the ports and so on. The last point, I think, has also been touched upon earlier, and that is the whole problem of global warming. We know, for example, that there are costs as well as some alleged benefits. I still remember I was shocked soon after I arrived in New York in 2005 to see a very long 3-page article in the New York Times, which is a broadsheet, of course, and basically arguing about the benefits of global warming, pointing out, for example, that the planting season for temperate agriculture would actually increase, output would therefore increase, and also that the melting of the Arctic ice would allow the route across North America to be used around the year. So we can see that it is not surprising that even that New York Times, with New York Times taking such views, that there has not been the strong opposition which one would hope for to global warming. Now, it's also important to recognize that the whole system of global finance has been skewed to mitigation. But for many developing countries in the tropics, adaptation is an immediate concern. We know, for example, that in countries such as Bangladesh and Vietnam, the rising sea levels have basically meant that seawater has crept into rice fields and accordingly reduce the output of rice in these things. Inevitably, this will cause rice output to decline in the world, and this is likely to cause the increases in price of rice comparable to the 2008 price increase, which was the last time we talked about the price of rice at a global level. It's also important for us to recognize that in much of Africa, as well as in other parts of the world, the process of desertification has accelerated, and increasingly many areas which were once classified as arid grasslands have become much more arid. And it is not surprising, therefore, that the Sahara Desert has actually increased. We have a situation now where extreme weather has also been problematic. As Professor Yunus mentioned, we have situations of flooding on the one hand, as well as droughts. In Malaysia, for example, we find that the El Nino and La Nina effects have been much more pronounced. So having more rain in a particular year does not ensure much more rain in another year. So for instance, in northern Malaysia, which is the main rice bowl for the country, we find that in the last 5 years, 2 of the 10 planting seasons have actually been cancelled. In other words, there has been a 20% reduction in the planting of rice as a consequence of extreme weather events. So we find, and the devastation, of course, in the so-called small island developing states, of which there are about 50, is of course extremely serious as well. So we have a situation where the condition of being in the tropics is not necessarily, has been far from benign. And perhaps more importantly, this is not something which is natural, which is entirely due to the nature of tropical ecology, but has been a consequence of systems, as Professor Yunus would have it, which have actually served to worsen the terms of trade of tropical agriculture against temperate agriculture, but also has had very other adverse consequences, as many of the previous speakers have testified. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Jomo. We'll come to discussion after this, after we finish. We are coming now to the distinguished Professor Stewart Lockie. It must be very late where you are, Professor Lockie, who is, of course, the director of the Keynes Institute at James Cook University. It must be well past midnight. Sorry to have kept you up. Thank you for joining us. And can we have your presentation on tropical challenges and the sustainable development agenda? Professor Lockie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It is indeed very late. But that's okay. You can't see the palm trees outside the window, but I will either ramble because it's so late or be very short. I have the honour of speaking to you from the traditional country of the Irukandji people in far north Queensland, Australia. My background, I think I may be the only non-economist on this panel. I'm an environmental sociologist who works mostly on climate adaptation. And I will come back, hopefully, at the end to some points picking up on some of Professor Jomo's very astute comments. Now, being based in Cairns, I am, of course, located in one of the world's wealthiest countries. I can from my study window here during the daytime, I can see the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area. And if I jump on a boat, within a few minutes, I can be out on the Great Barrier Reef World Heritage Area. There's no malaria. We've eliminated dengue, and the burden of disease is very low. If I jump on a commercial jet, it will take me 1 hour, 1 hour, 20 minutes before I arrive in Port Moresby, capital of Papua New Guinea. By any measure, one of the world's most economically disadvantaged countries, and by any measure, one of the world's most disadvantaged countries in relation to burden of disease and access to healthcare. If I change the commercial airliner for my car, within 1 hour, I can be in Aboriginal communities in which unemployment levels are over 50%. The burden of disease is, again, very high and comparable with sub-Saharan African countries. Now, I don't think that these sorts of disparities can be explained by proximity to the equator. I think they can only be reasonably explained by ongoing histories of colonialism and exploitation and apartheid. Next slide, please. Now, I won't labour the detail of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs. I'm sure you're all very familiar. When the 2030 Agenda was announced, I was encouraged by the focus on transformative change. And I was interested by the inclusion of additional language around universality and indivisibility. Because it seemed to me, and while I don't know the motivation of those involved in negotiating the agenda, it seemed to me that over the years, for all the language around integration in sustainable development, there were really two competing ideas on sustainable development. One was the mostly environmental interpretation, the interpretation where we put fences around things and to protect them from people, usually poor people. And there was the mostly economic version in which we boost economic growth and we address poverty alleviation. And we hope that when we've done that, we can get to a dealing with environmental sustainability. I've never seen much evidence of a mostly social approach to sustainable development. And it strikes me, and I've done no studies to prove the point, but it strikes me in my work with First Nations communities in Northern Australia and with colleagues in Papua New Guinea that, like one of the previous speakers said, there's no shortage of money. There's no shortage of money. There's not even any shortage of deep knowledge and expertise, but the real investment needs to be in people. If we want to spend money in ways that don't entrench corruption and don't entrench inequality, we really need to invest in people. So indivisibility is, in a way, become one of the themes for my work. Next slide, please. I was involved several years ago in a bit of work for the Global Sustainable Development Report, 2016 version, which led me to be asked to give some thought and provide some input to the UN High-Level Political Forum on the role of science in sustainable development. And a few things stood out. One being that for all the progress we were making in the world on poverty alleviation, it was quite clear that continued economic growth wasn't necessarily leading to higher levels of poverty alleviation. And some of the emerging issues such as automation, robotics, and so on, was going to present some fairly big challenges for the world of work and create very new development paths at the national level. Now, coming back and thinking about, well, what does this really mean in my part of the world? A few things, well, I've got several things on this slide, but a few things really stood out to me as being major barriers to sustainable development in Northern Australia and the South Pacific. And in the spirit of a panel, I thought I'd probably get about this far in my presentation and hopefully be able to either pick up on things other speakers have said or address a few gaps. And hopefully I'll be able to do a little bit of both. As I've said, I don't think there's a shortage of money, and I don't think there's a shortage of natural resources. I don't think there's a shortage of really talented people. But when I look around our region, particularly in PNG and in remote Australia, I see grossly insufficient health systems capability, which with the pandemic is leading to a rapidly unfolding humanitarian disaster just to our north. I'm going to come back to novel climate states. Geopolitical tension obviously has become a major issue. I'm not going to talk much about automation and labour productivity gains. I have recently done some work for the Australian government around this, and have been encouraging them to give considerable thought to how we direct the investment in science and technology to make sure that economic growth and production growth associated with the implementation of new technology supports rural communities and supports positive cycles of employment growth. Now, massive underinvestment in R&D and higher education in the tropics. I was really very, very pleased to see the Malaysian Academy organising a conference on tropical science. I think something like 6% of the world's science and engineering graduates come from the tropics, despite I think we're heading to rapidly over half the world's population in the tropics. And I don't believe that importing technology here is the answer. In my observation, research and development operates in the tropics as an extractive industry. Intellectual property, biological resources, and other resources are exported. And I don't think it's problematic that our colleagues from outside of the tropics take an interest and wish to undertake research. I don't think it's a problem that institutions from outside the tropics wish to invest in R&D. But I do think it's a problem if in the process we don't build institutional and personal capacities within the tropics to work in genuine partnership and make sure that the human capacity and the local benefits of all that work are realised. I'll skip a few points and get to my last one here, mass incarceration, because it picks up again on this point about inequality. So next slide, please. Now, one thing we never encourage our students to do is look at Wikipedia, but nonetheless, this is where I've taken this map. And it suggests that if we look across the tropical belt, rates of incarceration are by global standards relatively low. That if we look at where people get locked up overnight, the biggest problems are areas like the United States. And on a global scale, there is certainly a tendency for incarceration rates to be higher in high-income countries than in low-income countries, which tend to dominate across the tropics. But of course, the thing about inequality is that averages often hide it. Next slide, please. So I won't point the finger at other countries, I'll point the finger at my own. If we look at who in Australia is incarcerated, it's not even a little bit ambiguous. The answer is Indigenous men are incarcerated. Overall, rates of incarceration have been increasing. They've increased about 25% over the last 15 years. Dipped a little bit this year, in the last 12 months, I should say, which is sort of interesting with lots of lockdowns with COVID. Property crime has declined quite dramatically, in fact, but crimes against mostly women have gone up equally dramatically. But overall, crime is down just a little and incarceration is down just a little. But who is incarcerated? Well, in 2020, the imprisonment rate of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander adults was a bit over 2,000 per 100,000. So that's 2% of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population was in jail every night. That's no different to the rates of incarceration of African American citizens of the US. We look specifically at men, that increases to over 4,000 per 100,000. So every night of the week, 4% of Indigenous Australian men are in prison. The rates for women, not quite so high, but the rates for women have increased more over the last 20 years. Now, what happens as a consequence of these rates of imprisonment? That would mean that over the course of their lifetime, a very large percentage of Aboriginal men in particular would expect to have been locked up and acquired a criminal record. That will mean they're not eligible to work in a government job. They can't get what we call a blue card, which is a certification that you're safe to work with children, something that you need to work in the healthcare system, which is the largest employer in the country, particularly in regional areas where we have particularly high Indigenous populations. And it's going to make it more difficult to borrow money and get a job in any other sector. So the lifelong consequences are huge. We then consider, predominantly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander towns, regions, and we find that half the adult population there is incapable of getting a government job or borrowing money. So this is a huge constraint on sustainable development. Now, I'm sure, and we all know, that Australia is not the only country with a problem with locking up ethnic minorities. So next slide, please. So for a complete change of topic, I wanted to finish up by saying a few things about adaptation and come back again to this conference being hosted by an Academy of Science. There are some aspects of climate adaptation which are scientifically probably relatively straightforward. But changes in the way we manage mostly natural ecosystems, changes in the way we manage agriculture and forestry are not at all scientifically straightforward. These require massive investment. And as I've already said, investment in R&D in the tropics tends to be massively underdone. Figuring out how to manage coral reefs, tropical forests, tropical agriculture will be confronting. It will confront not just what we know, but how we know, how we manage things that have never happened before, how we make decisions with incredibly long timeframes under conditions of massive uncertainty using technology that hasn't been developed. And that will confront people's sense of what a protected area is and what we really want out of our ecosystems, what we value and what we'll invest in protecting. And I note my time is nearly up, so I'll leave it at that and thank you all for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Lockie. If we followed the schedule, we just have about 5 minutes for discussion. But if the speakers agree, perhaps we can exceed it by another 5 minutes if there's no objection among the speakers, yeah. And so at least we have 10 minutes of the 15 we thought we'd get. I have a couple of questions that have been posted here, and they are more quite general in nature. Yeah, and perhaps I can begin by posing that question because Professor Lockie, you said you didn't think technology is the issue, imported technology is the answer, and you said that there should be the development of technology in situ, more or less. Yeah, so but there's a question here that the promise to share technology with the poor countries is all a hoax. Right? So no wonder it plays out in the vaccine case. There's a lot of emotion there, of course. Now, is there a way out? Now, from your perspective, the way out is develop the technology yourself. But with the vaccine, it's a bit too late, right? You might be dead before you do anything. So, so this hoax, I mean, what do we do about it, Professor Lockie?
Well, I suppose it would be an overstatement to say we should import no technology, but I think we need to be moved to a situation where we can import as equals. And importing as equals means not just boosting the economies of tropical countries, but their own R&D sectors so that there's genuine exchange. And you know, there will be there are technologies which probably are universal. I don't know that it matters much, you know, where a computer chip is developed, but there's other things that are really very climate specific, and I would say culturally and community specific, and it's really quite critical. You know, it's great that, you know, you can go to Europe and find schools of tropical medicine, but it's even greater when you go to the tropics and find schools of tropical medicine.
Thank you. There is another quite general question, which is quite broad, and may I ask Professor Jomo and also Professor Njuguna, you know, to address this particular question, which says, Professor Jalal, the COVID-19 global pandemic has been a major setback in progress toward SDG 17, the SDG goals, the 17 goals. Now, what are the major challenges on sustainability and development are we going to face in the tropics after COVID-19? So you understand now why I said it's quite general, but you know, what would be the challenges for sustainability and development after post-COVID-19? Everyone talks about build back better or build back greener and so on and so forth. There are, you know, alliteration that's very nice. Professor Jomo, would you like to get at this?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think it's important for us to remind ourselves that the SDGs were already off track before the onset of the pandemic at the beginning of last year. So what the pandemic has done has to set things back further. And the whole attitude towards not only vaccines, but also the intellectual property rights as far as testing is concerned, treatments are concerned, equipment, protective equipment is concerned, and so on, have further put developing countries at a huge disadvantage, unnecessarily raising the costs of the matters concerned. Furthermore, I think we also know that what has happened is that financial markets have acted to most developing countries who have been very, very hesitant to run significantly larger deficits. So all this basically means that we do not have the bold macroeconomic policies which are needed in order to overcome the immediate challenges. Unfortunately, I do not see the question of sustainability being especially well addressed during this period. We have seen, for example, in my own country, Malaysia, a number of situations where there has been a great deal of pressure to actually increase logging in recent months. So unfortunately, I think the situation is very, very dire, but it's important for us to link it with the earlier question of the question of intellectual property rights. Let's remember that intellectual property rights have only been strengthened transnationally from 1995. Before that, there was no existing international property rights law. And this basically meant that technologies were basically available, of course, with some restrictions. It is only since 1995 that this has been possible. So, for example, if Jonas Salk, the man who developed the polio vaccine, was still alive, he would be appalled by what has happened. For him, the vaccine he developed was not something to be privately held. And as you also know, Sarah Gilbert, the leader of the team at Oxford, which developed the Oxford vaccine, has basically eschewed claims to patent payments. And the result of this is that, of course, the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is based on the Oxford discoveries, have been the cheapest available vaccines, at least from Western companies. Let me stop there.
Thank you, thank you. I mean, you rightly observe that the IP matters in respect of COVID vaccines are being discussed or supposed to have been resolved at WTO level, right? And these things seem to take so much time, and there's a lot of possessiveness about this property, this intellectual property that has resulted in a calamity, widespread calamity in the poorer countries. But Professor Njuguna, I mean, again and again, you know, from the answers one gets, the financial markets are identified as being, you know, the culprit, as not serving the needs of sustainable finance, for example, sufficiently. Now, you talked, you know, obviously just now, you know, about you know, sort of digital financing and so on. And Professor Yunus also spoke about it when I asked him about it, and he said it's a question of the direction of landing, if you like, rather than the methodology. So you had a lot of faith just now, you know, in digital financing. Are you not overwhelmed by this attack on financial markets and its inability to have a human heart?
Thank you very much for that question. And let me start from the very beginning, because essentially, even what Professor Sachs was really talking about is that he never came to the point where he needs to talk about leadership and institutions. Because essentially, virtually every market must have a regulator. Markets must be properly governed, and that is what allows markets to develop. So in a sense, what I was giving an example to was how I've come through the process of trying to ring fence, that is mobile phone financial services, and to defend it, and also create regulations that are actually supported. Is an example of a market, and we can do that. Even that's how even Professor Yunus succeeded in the bank in Bangladesh, just because they safeguarded that. So essentially for me, and this is the broader picture about sustainability comes in terms of how do we protect our markets? Because it is the markets, it is in the markets that economic rent is shared and distributed. So you have to be a participant in the market, but somehow the institutions involved must ring fence the operations and even the rules of the game in the market. If we don't safeguard the rules of the game and the incentive mechanism, then obviously markets will fail. And that's why most markets have failed. You know, right now, we talked about intellectual property rights. And I also look at it in terms of why do tropical products not generate enough economic rents? Because we do not even talk about restructuring the global value chain. And this is part of the whole totality of the game. So we can move from one market to the other, but we have to remember that actually it is the institutions that regulate the market, institutions that protect the market that are missing in the whole equation. And that's why we find that those markets that fail to perform is not because the structure was wrong, but actually the institutions that were supposed to protect them and help them achieve their targeted goals. Left on their own, they cannot succeed. And that is why my point is very clear that, yes, if you have proper governance of the markets, then markets will work. And just to finish off, I've been discussing about what has actually happened with this pandemic. And for example, when you look at growth and poverty, some of the areas that African Economic Research Consortium has been engaged in, we have shown that actually the pandemic has wiped almost 20 years of that energy in terms of poverty reduction. And we can see, where do we now start from? We have to start by protecting private investment and developing markets. And that is something that we can actually push the debate further. Thank you very much. Sorry for taking more time.
No, it's okay. Institutions, making institutions think, you know, having institutions controlled by public policy, you know, to serve, you know, the end of finance, you know, rather than the end of the institutions' need to maximize its profits. But I have a number here. Professor Njuguna. You know, sustainable bonds in 2020 were supposed to have doubled on 2019. You know, they were $544.3 billion of new sustainable bonds. where is the money going? How are they coming at all to our part of the world, the tropics? So how does this allocation take place? Or, to take it further, are countries, poorer countries, tropics, in the tropics, involved in the definition, in the green taxonomy, about what is a green company, what are green processes, what is a sustainable development effort? So all these relates to finance and green finance and the markets. What is happening from your perspective, from what you've seen in respect of the direction of green bonds towards much needed sustainable development in the tropics?
Thank you very much. I think the point I'm making here is that if the governance system is wrong, we are going to create artificial shortage. Artificial shortage will actually drive the prices, and this is something that we've seen. And I was when you were raising that question, I was thinking about how we constructed during the global financial crisis in 2009. We constructed domestic infrastructure bonds, and because they were financing targeted projects that have already been approved in the public investment program, they were quite exciting. But all of a sudden, out of the global financial crisis, then all of a sudden, Eurobond became very, very important, very, very lucrative, because you run away from the ring fencing of controls. So in a sense, this is an artificial shortage that we create to build the value and run away from regulation. And this is where we are finding most of these problems. We also have to look at it in terms of what kind of projects are they financing? What is the price of those projects? In developing countries, and look at examples across Africa, Kenya, Zambia, and all that, where they are having debt distress. You look at the projects that were financed by those bonds, and you find that they are overly expensive. The bottom line is that it is the governance problem that has crept in and has created these artificial shortages, which actually creates an artificial price. The problem is that we don't know where the resolution will be, because some of that is actually external debt. Debt distress is coming up, so it means that it's going to affect other aspects of even the flexibility of governments or even public policy for sustainable development. And this is where we are going in most of the countries in this region. So in a sense, it can be applied nationally where governance structure is failing. Then obviously, all other aspects of finance are also failing. And finance is a very, should I say, fragile aspect because of rent and extraction of illegal rent that is so easy and so feasible, where governance has to.
All right, thank you. I think, we're coming to the end of our session. And as always, you reach the point where what we have is problems. People not doing the right thing, not doing the right thing, not doing the right thing. I mean, is there any way we can suggest what can be done? What can be done? What can be done? Okay, whether it's a specific initiative or a broader policy platform, or forming an alliance among countries in the tropics, to push the agenda. Have you got suggestions before we close, one after the other, to see what can be done? What can we do? How can we get together and work together? Can I start with Professor Jomo?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm afraid I don't have a simple answer. I tried to address the whole question of tropical agriculture, tropical disease, tropical ecology, and tropical meteorology. And these obviously require very different solutions. But I do think there has been a breakdown of multilateralism over the last 3 decades or so, since the end of the Cold War. Now we have the emergence of a new Cold War, which is not necessarily going to produce better results. What we do need very, very urgently is a commitment to multilateral governance of the world, and I think that there is this is sorely lacking. But how do we move towards that right now? I think the ball is right now in the court of President Biden. He has to make some very important choices as to how to move forward in terms of the attempt by the US to reassert global leadership. And this is why I do think that it is important to keep the issues very much alive, including the issues which are adversely affecting the tropical world.
Thank you very much. Professor Lockie?
Sure, thank you. Look, I might continue Professor Jomo's thread. I think even as we scale down to the regional, national, subnational level, there's a lot to do. There are significant challenges, but I think a large part of the answer is around coalition building and around institution building, and in creating, positive relationships between what we're doing in the world of science and R&D with what's going on, whether it's in agriculture, in protected area management, in forestry, in urban development, and so on, with community, with education, and ultimately, it's easy to get a little bit scared by the challenge of the climate adaptation threat, and the other threats that we see all too close. But ultimately, I think investing in people and doing that through coalition and institution building.
Thank you very much. And Professor Njuguna, in a few words, what do you think can be done?
In a few words, and this is what I've been telling African Union, that the three things that we needed to worry about and to help us reverse the effects of the pandemic. First one is protect private investment. Here we have to go into education, health, and even nutrition. The second, we have to protect and develop markets. That's going to be very, very critical. And finally, climate change and how it infuses across the three aspects, the other two aspects that I've talked about. And whatever happens, we have to create structures that are going to help us in terms of reversing what has happened, using the African Union as the coalition that can actually provide the voice and even remedies in terms of what, and instruments in terms of what can be done. Thank you very much.
Okay, can I then sort of thank everyone here, the three professors who've stayed till the bitter end, to speak on our subject of sustainable development in the tropics, and for giving us of their time and knowledge and to discuss the matter. And also, of course, Professor Jeffrey Sachs and Professor Muhammad Yunus before this. I think, I hope that the conference organizers will take heed of the issues that have been raised, the matters that have been pressed, pushed, whilst also trying to find some convergence in trying to find solutions to those issues. Multilateralism obviously is necessary, but alliances by those within that multilateral framework to push is necessary. And therefore, I hope something comes out of the discussion from the conference that's been organized. And thank you again for your time, everyone. And can I wish you, I think, not quite good night yet, is it, Njuguna? But certainly a very, very good night to Stewart, Lockie. Good night to Jomo. And thank you very much, everyone. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you very much. And congratulations for your reading the process.
Okay.
Thank you very much to our esteemed panelists for their insights and inputs toward the topic of sustainable development in the tropics. Our special thanks to our moderator, Munir Majid, for moderating the dialogue on sustainable development in the tropics. And with that, we have come to the end of the first day. Everyone has gained new knowledge and insights, and we look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. It is 5:14 here. Thank you.
So I'm going to start my work before I close. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you very much. From Australia and from Kuala Lumpur. This is from Nairobi.
Pleasure. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you for staying up.
Bye.